The words hit her like a thunderclap, spoken in a voice rough as sun-baked leather. She stood frozen in the doorway of the cabin she'd traveled 3 weeks to reach, her mail-order marriage certificate still damp with ink. Her new husband's eyes burned into hers, dark and demanding, as heat flooded her cheeks. She'd expected a practical arrangement. She hadn't expected her own body to answer his command before her mind could protest. Before we get into the story, comment below with one word that describes your life right now. And subscribe because tomorrow we're sharing a story that will change how you see the world. The advertisement had been brief, almost curt. Rancher seeks a wife. Must be hardworking and sensible. No time for courtship. Write if interested. Abigail had read it by candlelight in the cramped room she shared with 3 other seamstresses in a Philadelphia boarding house. Her fingers had been raw from needle pricks, her back aching from 14-hour days bent over fabric that would adorn women who'd never know hunger or exhaustion. She'd written back that same night. The correspondence that followed had been sparse. Caleb wrote like a man who measured words the way he measured grain, carefully and without waste. He'd told her about his ranch in the Wyoming Territory, about the mountains that turned purple at sunset, about the hard winters and harder work. He'd been honest about what he needed, a partner, someone to share the labor and the loneliness, someone practical. He hadn't mentioned love, neither had she. The journey west had taken 23 days, stagecoaches and trains, and finally a wagon that rattled her teeth loose over roads that were little more than suggestions carved into the prairie. By the time she arrived in the town of Red Fork, Abigail's traveling dress was more dust than fabric, and her hair had escaped its pins to hang in limp strands around her face. The man waiting at the depot didn't seem to notice. Caleb stood apart from the small crowd, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad through the shoulders in a way that spoke of years of physical labor. His face was all hard angles, jaw sharp enough to cut glass, cheekbones that cast shadows in the bright light. Dark hair curled at his collar, and when he pushed back his hat, she saw eyes the color of whiskey held up to the firelight. He looked at her the way she imagined he'd look at a horse he was considering buying, assessing, calculating, utterly without sentiment. Miss Hartwell. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, roughened by dust and distance. Mr. Dawson. She kept her own voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. You're taller than I pictured. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe. You're smaller. I'm stronger than I look. You'd have to be. He reached for her single trunk, lifting it like it weighed nothing. The preacher's waiting. Figured we'd get the ceremony done today. Head to the ranch before dark. Abigail's throat tightened. She'd known this was coming. Had prepared herself for the stark efficiency of a frontier marriage. But hearing it stated so plainly still stole her breath. That's very direct. I don't waste time, Miss Hartwell. Out here, daylight's too precious. He started walking toward a small white church at the end of the main street. You can change your mind if you want. I'll pay your passage back east. Abigail fell into step beside him. I haven't changed my mind. Good. He didn't slow his pace. Because I need a wife who doesn't spook easily. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. The preacher rattled through the vows with the enthusiasm of a man who'd done this 100 times and expected to do it 100 more. Abigail heard herself making promises she'd never imagined speaking, her voice thin in the small wooden church. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Caleb turned to her. For a moment, his whiskey-colored eyes softened with something she couldn't name. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture so brief and businesslike it might have been a handshake. Mrs. Dawson, he said. The words settled over her like a weight. She is married now, to a stranger, in a territory so wild the nearest neighbor was probably miles away. What had she done? The ranch was called the Crooked Creek, and it sprawled across a valley where the mountains seemed to touch the sky. Abigail's first sight of it from the wagon seat stole her breath. The land stretched endlessly, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean she'd never seen. Cattle dotted the distant hills, and a river wound through the property, glinting silver in the fading light. The house itself was modest but solid, 2 stories of timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front, Smoke curled from a chimney, and she could smell something cooking inside. "Who tends the house while you're working?" Abigail asked as Caleb helped her down from the wagon. "Rosa. She's been with the ranch since before I bought it. Her husband Miguel is my foreman." Caleb grabbed her trunk from the wagon bed. "She'll show you around. I've got to check on the herd before dark." Abigail's stomach dropped. "You're leaving?" Something crossed his face. Not quite an apology, but close. "The cattle don't wait, Mrs. Dawson. We lost 3 heads to wolves last week. I need to make sure the rest are secure." Of course. She smoothed her dusty skirts, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand." Caleb hesitated, studying her with those unreadable eyes. "Rosa, we'll take care of you. We'll talk more at supper." And then he was gone, striding toward the barn with the purposeful gait of a man who had 100 things demanding his attention. Abigail stood in the yard, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, wondering if this was what the rest of her life would look like. Rosa turned out to be a small woman, with warm brown eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She welcomed Abigail with genuine warmth, showing her to a comfortable room on the 2nd floor with a window overlooking the valley. "The Señor, he is a good man," Rosa said as she set fresh water in the basin. "Hard, yes. The grief, it has made him harder. But good underneath. Grief?" Rosa's expression flickered. "His brother died 2 winters ago. Fever took him fast before the doctor could come from town." She crossed herself. "Caleb, he has not been the same since." Abigail's chest tightened. She understood grief. Her own parents had died within months of each other, leaving her with nothing but debts and a determination to survive. "I'm sorry for his loss," Rosa nodded. "He needs someone, even if he does not know it yet. Maybe you help him remember how to live, not just work." She bustled away before Abigail could respond, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the vast silence of the Wyoming evening. Supper that night was a quiet affair. Caleb ate with the same efficient purpose he seemed to bring to everything, speaking only when necessary about practical matters. The state of the herd, repairs that needed doing, the approaching winter. Abigail studied him across the rough-hewn table, trying to reconcile the stern man before her with the grief Rosa had mentioned. There were shadows in his eyes, she realized, shadows that had nothing to do with the lamplight. "You'll have your own room," Caleb said finally, setting down his fork. "Across the hall from mine. I won't ask anything of you that you're not willing to give." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she kept her voice steady. "And what do you expect me to be willing to give?" His jaw tightened. "Work, partnership, a home that doesn't feel like an empty tomb anymore." He met her eyes directly. "I'm not looking for love, Mrs. Dawson. I buried that possibility a long time ago. But I need someone to share this life with, someone who won't run when things get hard." "I don't run," Abigail said quietly. "I've never run from anything in my life." Something flickered in his expression, recognition maybe, or respect. "Then we understand each other." The first weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Abigail threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to help Rosa with breakfast, spending afternoons learning to preserve meat and vegetables for the coming winter, and evenings poring over the ranch's account books, which had been neglected for longer than Caleb would probably admit. She discovered quickly that running a ranch household was nothing like working in a seamstress shop. Here, survival depended on preparation. Every jar of preserves, every cord of wood, every pound of dried beef could mean the difference between life and death when the snows came. Her hands, once nimble with needle and thread, developed blisters and then calluses. Her arms grew stronger from hauling water and kneading bread. She fell into bed, exhausted each night, muscles aching in ways she'd never known. But there was satisfaction in it too. A sense of purpose she'd never felt, hunched over embroidery in a cramped boarding house room. Caleb noticed the changes. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable. He'd nod at the wood she'd stacked by the kitchen door or comment briefly on the improved state of the accounts. Small acknowledgments that meant more than they should. And there were other things. The way he made sure the heaviest tasks were done before she woke. The new boots that appeared by the door one morning, sized perfectly for her feet. The evening she'd found a book of poetry on her pillow, worn from use but carefully preserved. For the long nights, he'd said gruffly when she'd thanked him. Winter gets lonely out here. It was the first time he'd acknowledged that she might need something beyond the practical. The first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. October arrived with frost and shorter days. The temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on the water barrel overnight. Abigail woke one morning to find the world transformed, every surface glittering with rime. Caleb came in from the barn, his breath clouding in the cold air. "The storm's coming," he said. "A bad one. We need to get the cattle to the lower pasture before it hits." Abigail was already reaching for her coat. "I'll help." His eyebrows rose. "You know how to ride. I learned as a girl. My father kept horses before he lost everything to drink." She met his skeptical gaze steadily. "I can help, Caleb. You need every hand you can get." For a long moment he stared at her, then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth curled upward. "You really don't scare easily, do you? I told you I don't run." They rode out together, the wind sharp against their faces. The sky had turned the color of bruised iron, and Abigail could taste snow in the air. She stayed close to Caleb as they pushed the cattle down from the hills, her horse responding to her commands despite the howling wind. By the time they got the herd to safety, the first flakes were falling, thick and fast, blotting out the mountains within minutes. "We need to get back," Caleb shouted over the wind. "Now!" But the storm had other plans. They made it halfway to the ranch before the blizzard swallowed them whole. Visibility dropped to nothing, the world reduced to a wall of white. Abigail's horse stumbled, and she felt herself sliding from the saddle. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Caleb pulled her against his chest, his body a wall against the wind. "There's a line shack nearby," he yelled into her ear. "Quarter-mile north. Can you make it?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. They fought their way through the snow, Caleb half carrying her the last 100 yards. The shack appeared out of the white like a miracle, a small wooden structure barely larger than a closet. But it had walls and a roof, and a small stove that Caleb got, burning within minutes. They huddled together as the storm raged outside, sharing body heat while the temperature dropped. "You're shivering," Caleb said, pulling her closer. "So are you." Abigail let herself lean into him, too cold and exhausted to maintain distance. "How long will the storm last? Could be hours, could be days." His arms tightened around her. "But we're safe here. We have wood. We have each other." The simple statement hung in the air between them. "We have each other." As if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Why did you really advertise for a wife?" Abigail asked after a long silence. "The truth, Caleb." His jaw tightened. She felt the tension ripple through his body. "Because I was dying of loneliness," he said finally. "And I was too proud to admit it. After Daniel died, I threw myself into work. Told myself I didn't need anyone, that needing people just meant losing them eventually." Abigail understood that fear, had lived with it herself since her parents died. What changed? Everything. Nothing. He exhaled roughly. "One morning, I woke up and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed, the last time I'd had a conversation that wasn't about cattle or weather. I looked around at this ranch I'd built, and all I could see was how empty it was. So you advertised for a wife. I advertised for a partner. Someone practical. Someone who wouldn't expect things I couldn't give." His voice dropped. "I didn't expect you." Abigail pulled back slightly to look at his face. The firelight carved shadows across his features, softening the hard angles. In the orange glow, she could see vulnerability he usually kept hidden. "What do you mean? You're not what I expected." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were cold, but his touch was gentle. "I expected to be capable. I got fierce. I expected it to be practical. I got someone who looks at my books and sees stories in the numbers, who faces down blizzards without flinching, who makes Rosa laugh for the first time in months." Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. "Caleb, I know what we agreed," he interrupted. "I know this was supposed to be practical, but I've been lying to myself for weeks now, pretending I don't feel anything when you walk into a room. Pretending my chest doesn't tighten every time you smile. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Abigail felt heat flood through her despite the cold. I'm falling for you, he said roughly. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. But here we are, trapped in a blizzard, and all I can think about is how much I want to kiss you. Abigail's breath caught. She should be sensible. Should maintain the distance they'd agreed upon. Should protect herself from the inevitable pain of caring too deeply. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, tentative. Two people testing unfamiliar waters. But then Caleb made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate, filled with all the loneliness and longing they'd both been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I think I have since the moment you stepped off that stage and told me you were stronger than you looked. Tears burned in Abigail's eyes. I love you too. I didn't want to. I didn't think I was allowed to. You're my wife, Abigail. His voice was rough with emotion. You're allowed to feel whatever you damn well please. They stayed in the line shack until the storm passed, talking and holding each other and learning the shape of this new thing between them. When they finally made it back to the ranch, Rosa took one look at them and smiled knowingly. Finally, she said, I was wondering how long it would take. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Abigail's life. The practical marriage she'd expected transformed into something richer, deeper. Caleb still worked from dawn to dusk, but now he sought her out in the evenings, pulling her close by the fire to talk about everything and nothing. And at night, they shared a room. The first time had been terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Abigail had stood in the doorway of his bedroom, heart pounding, uncertain what to expect. Caleb had crossed to her slowly, taking her hands in his. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, he'd said quietly. I'm ready. She'd met his eyes. I want this. I want you. What followed had been nothing like the whispered warnings she'd heard from other women. Caleb was patient, tender, checking constantly that she was comfortable. And when she'd finally let go of her fear and given herself over to the moment, she'd discovered a pleasure she hadn't known existed. I didn't know, she'd whispered afterward, curled against his chest. I didn't know it could be like that. Caleb had pressed his lips to her hair. Neither did I. Not like this. December brought the deepest snows Abigail had ever seen. The world turned white and silent, the ranch cut off from town for weeks at a time, but the isolation that might have felt oppressive before now felt like a gift. Time to learn from each other, time to build something real. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb pulled a small box from his pocket. I should have done this properly from the start, he said, his voice rough. But I didn't know then what I know now. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring, set with a small blue stone that caught the firelight. This was my mother's. He met her eyes. She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone who made me feel like the man I was meant to be. I've been carrying it for 15 years, waiting to find her. Caleb, Abigail's voice broke. Marry me again, he said, not for convenience, not for practicality. Marry me because I love you more than I've ever loved anything, because you've made this empty house a home, because I can't imagine facing another day without you beside me. Tears streamed down her face. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness she'd come to expect from him. They renewed their vows on Christmas morning, just the two of them standing in the main room with Rosa and Miguel as witnesses. This time, when Caleb spoke his promises, his voice was thick with emotion. And when he kissed her, it wasn't brief or businesslike. It was a claim, a declaration. Afterward, as they sat together watching the snow fall outside, Abigail pressed her hand to her stomach. She hadn't told him yet, hadn't found the right moment. But now, wrapped in his arms with his ring on her finger,